Time was, Nintendo's release schedule was a mess. Darts at a dartboard would have had more logic. In the Wii U days, months at a time would elapse between releases, and then games would drop in gluts. The Switch era has been revolutionary in so many ways, but not least because Nintendo seems to have developed a science of how to space releases, what kinds of games to put when, and when they need their biggest hits. So, with over 6 years of Switch releases to go on, let's see if we can reverse engineer Nintendo's release strategy, and, into the bargain, we're going to demonstrate why putting Pikmin 4 in July is the perfect placement for the pint-sized pioneers. So firstly, let's consider the games Nintendo cares about. Primarily, these are games they developed, the classic first-party titles, but also significant are major console-shifting third-party exclusives on the system, especially those games which Nintendo are publishing in at least one territory. So this includes games with Nintendo IP like Mario + Rabbids and Mario & Sonic at the Olympics, as well as titles like Octopath Traveler, Dragon's Quest XI, both from Square, and Monster Hunter Rise from Capcom. These are Nintendo's fixed points on their schedule. Of course, the Switch also has lots of other big titles, but games like Doom Eternal or The Witcher 3 don't show evidence of having moved Nintendo's core release timings that much. They also almost always give new games a minimum of a 2-week window of their own in the spotlight, usually 3 weeks, and large titles like Zelda or Animal Crossing can sometimes get as many as 6 weeks clear after a release. Occasionally multiple games have been released within the 3-week buffer, but normally this is due to some kind of conflict in terms of dates. Fire Emblem Warriors had a different release date in different territories, putting its Western release in the path of Super Mario Odyssey, and Metroid Prime Remastered shadow dropped into the path of Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, which probably worked out fine because they have significantly different audiences. Still, counting these games, only once in the lifetime of the Switch has the machine gone 2 consecutive months without a release, in December 2020 and January 2021, smack in the middle of the pandemic era, and during a time it can be assumed that there were significant delays, if not in the game development, then likely in the quality assurance process, a vital part of readying games for release, but one that is generally conducted in person and indoors, which was problematic during the pandemic. But not all releases are equal, and there are some slots that are particularly crucial to Nintendo. One is obviously the November pre-Black Friday slot, the place for their biggest game of the year in terms of sales potential, and for which the Pokemon Company usually has first dibs. Another is the October game, and usually of the 2 titles they tend to release in October, the first one, which kicks off the holiday window proper, is often the bigger one. Both one of the October games and the November game needs to be a big seller and high profile. As you can see from the list on screen, although Nintendo usually release 2 games in October, with a spacing of roughly 3 weeks between the October and November titles, one has big time name recognition, whereas the other follows in the coattails. But another important date for Nintendo is the end of March, before the close of the financial year, the chance for Nintendo to leave the financial year with confidence. Nintendo doesn't always have a game themselves to round out the year, but they pretty much always have a kind of event happening. For example, in 2021, Monster Hunter Rise came in for a landing at the end of March, and other games we've got in the late March window range from the category of they're tiny games, but they're all we've got, such as Kirby's Star Allies and Yoshi's Crafted World, to big titles like Animal Crossing New Horizons and Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which are definitely tentpole titles for the company. 2017 and 2023 are both exceptions in not having a significant late March title, but only because any games launched there will be right in the hype window surrounding those years' respective Zelda titles. However, after these 3 slots, the next most prestigious date to release a game in is the end of July. They have always aimed at putting a big game in this window, a third-party game if they can't get anything internal. So far in the Switch's lifespan, we've had, in July, Splatoon 2, Octopath Traveler, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Paper Mario The Origami King, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And remember, originally the 2022 game was going to be Splatoon 3, but it was swapped with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, presumably because the latter was more ready to release. Of the 2 though, Splatoon 3 is a huge seller, and it shows the importance of the July slot to Nintendo that they put a game of that size in that position. So, why July? You might instinctively think that June, the end of the financial quarter, would be more significant, and it's certainly true that the spring quarter is usually graced with a balance of casual titles, Clubhouse Games, Toy Builder Garage, Switch Sports, and Everybody Want to Switch. alongside a major anchor point in June, generally in the form of a Mario sports game. These titles are usually surefire sellers, but I think there's one reason they don't occupy the July slot, and that's because July is really the one that Nintendo takes the most seriously. I think there are a couple of reasons for this. One, it's equidistant between the March and November peaks, so it makes sense to have a relatively large game there. It's also a quarter that includes August, when the company tends to take things slow, with reportedly much of Japan taking holidays during this period. Note that during the lifetime of the Switch, only Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle and Astral Chain launched in August, both years with very packed holiday lineups due to the new hardware, and both of these released in the very final days of August on the 29th and 30th respectively. What this means is that from the point of view of financial reporting, the most significant sales of the quarter need to be held up by the July release. It also needs to be a substantial enough game that it can continue to deliver over several weeks. But there's something else unusual about this list, and it's not just that you can take letters from each of these titles to spell the word like, though the like button would love it if you gave it a little summer loving. No, the thing that's unusual about this list that you might not have noticed is the massive number of games that are RPGs, or at least are games with obsessive communities such as Splatoon. Japan still has a very work-centric culture, but the month of August, and particularly the long weekend around the Festival of Obon, is a time for travelling and seeing family and just taking time off work. This means it's perfect for larger, more complex or more niche games like Xenoblade and Fire Emblem, and indeed Pikmin. Scheduling games which require larger playtimes also mean they're more likely to still be generating buzz and interest on social media over longer periods, where Japanese people are more likely to mix with other people they wouldn't normally encounter. This means the potential is there for these games to be driven by word of mouth. With 1.86 million copies sold by March 2023, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was hardly a juggernaut title. But that's not what's important about the July title. It's the place for games that make a statement about Nintendo, that Nintendo produce quality games and look what people are spending their summer playing. Now, Pikmin has never been a monster seller, but it has always been positioned positively. Pikmin 3 also received the July slot. Pikmin 3 Deluxe the October slot, although to be fair, it was during the pandemic when all bets were off. Rumours had been strong that the game was in Nintendo's back pocket, perhaps since 2019. You could also, I guess, argue that the real workhorse title this year was Zelda, and so a smaller title like Pikmin is only following in the wake of the titanic Tears of the Kingdom, which I have little doubt will continue to sell big time in the months and even years to come. But I think the July slot speaks more to how they perceive Pikmin. Yes, a smaller title, but one that rewards longer play sessions and a more obsessive, interested community, and possibly one that will benefit from continued word of mouth over the summer season. But what do you think? Am I way off the mark? Let me know in the comments below. Meanwhile, thank you very much for tuning into another video, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.